Hey, this is Cody over at Anderson Design and Fabrication. We got ourselves a 2022 Subaru Outback Wilderness. I'm going to throw a 2-inch lift on it and push the max with the tires. Follow us along on this adventure. Alright, first step of doing this 2-inch custom lift kit from ADF is pulling your tires and wheels off.
We're going over our 2-inch lift kit for our new 2020 Wilderness. We got our 2-inch front spacers, 2-inch rear spacers, and we have our rear multi-link spacers, which are the alignment spacers for the rear subframe. This corrects for all the geometry change, keeps your trailing arms, ladder arms, and lower control arms at factory geometry.
What you got to do is you got to get over here and pull out your front struts. All right, guys, we're getting ready to start the front, and first thing you got to do is mark your alignment bolt. It's right here. Make sure you make 2 points so you can line them up later and get yourself to an alignment shot, like so.
Next thing, you want to make sure your ABS line is disconnected, and then also your brake line is disconnected. So this up, and a little flathead screwdriver inside this clip right here will make this pop out. Make sure to fasten your hub with something to keep it pressure against it, otherwise your inner CV joint shaft will actually pull out of the cup. So don't let the hub fall outwards after you remove the strut.
Unmarking your camber bolt and you get your hub assembly secured, you're going to want to take off these 3 14mm nuts and then pull out your camber bolts.
How to identify which is the front spacer that goes onto the front struts. So this has 2 bolts. Yeah, it doesn't fit right. So 3 bolts, you notice that they're marked L and R on each one. Left is always the driver's side, R is the passenger side. That is the left and right of the vehicle if you're sitting in the vehicle. R is going to be the forward-most facing stud in the vehicle. So when you're looking into the engine bay, you should be able to read both logos. So slide it over the top hat. It does not matter orientation because they are all the same, no matter which way you spin it. And then throw the nuts on. Okay, so how to tighten these, get them nice and tight. You want to take a wrench that's larger and put it up top, flip it over. And then take this guy, tighten. It's a little too tight to get a torque wrench in there, but a good amount will be good enough. There. Now that we got the new strut spacer attached to the top hat, you want to make sure when you're installing, make sure you have your L and your R to the forward-most facing stud in the vehicle, okay? So when you put this in, you can read the logo looking in from the front of the car.
Put your bottom bolt in and then your camber bolt. All right, slide your ABS line back in, clip it in, put your sway bar back in its bolt onto the strut, tighten that guy up, undo your bungee cords. Guys, once you have everything hooked back up in here and the strut spacer in the car, you're going to want to move to the back of the vehicle, and before you lift it all the way up, you're going to want to unbolt the rear strut from the top inside the car. Once you guys get the floor liners out and the top piece that sits on top of the tire, you're going to want to take these 14mm nuts off, both sides, left and right. After you get the two nuts on the top on the rear strut out, then you're going to want to lift the car back up and take out the bottom. The driver's side, yank it out. Take out the brake line bracket. There's a 12mm on both sides. Most of the time you can take a 1/2 inch ratchet because you can't find a hammer and beat it out. Same on the passenger side. Pull your bolt out. Alright, there's a bunch of this plastic right here under the car. This is the driver's side, and then that plastic needs to come off. So looks like that, and then the rest are clips. Take your pick these guys out. Okay, after you get those panels out, here's another ABS line that you need to take off. At least lower, not take off. Little bolts hooked to the subframe. You're gonna want to pull both of those. Yeah. 10mm.
Are unbolted. Now you want to remove the rear subframe support, and that's one 14mm socket on each side at this point right here, and the other side.
All right, before you take off your main subframe support bolts, the big M14 bolts right here, before you take these out, you're going to want to get a trainee jack or a jack if you're doing it on the floor, and you're going to want to support your differential. Okay, here we go. If you got a transmission jack like this, it makes it life a lot easier. Make sure it's supported under the diff, and then you can go ahead and take your M14s out and then lower the subframe down. Now once those 4 M14 bolts are out, these guys, all the way out, you're going to want to lower this down slowly so you can pull all these pucks out. Okay. Go ahead. Keep going. Make sure none of your lines are getting tight that you forgot to undo. Hold up. And and then go around and pull these out. Sometimes when you're pulling the rear struts out, you got to push down on the rear subframe and then pull out.
Okay, now we're installing the rear spacers. 2 bolts, 2 bolts.
Strut it on your strut, your rear strut. And tighten them down. Use your little wrench method. And then that's a 14 mil.
Okay, now we're installing the new ADF multi-link spacer. So remember, this is taller than 2 inches because we're also making up for the factory height of the factory spacer here, plus the 2 inches. So we get the new bolt and hardware, install it on the inside of the block, and then we thread it into the body. Into the inside of the block, and then we start threading it into the body.
Started.
Okay, speed things up. Get it till it's snug. Rotate the block with the ADF pointing outwards. Okay, so the way you torque down these upper bolts into the body, you slide your 7/8 or 22 millimeter socket. Make sure it's a 3/8. Use a long extension, run it into the extension, and then rotate your block pointing outwards. Okay, so after you got your block snugged up and the extension's still in there, grab your torque wrench and you'll torque it down to 106.5 foot-pounds.
And go around and do that to all 4.
Okay, now we're gonna put the rear strut in. You wanna get it up into the holes first and get the nuts fastened.
Okay, make sure you put your bottom bolt into your strut before you hook up your bottom of your multi-link spacers.
Okay, now that you have both of your struts in, mounted up at the top and mounted down at the hub, now you can lift up on the bottom of the subframe to close in the gap here. You get your larger M14 bolts, slide this up through, and then on the inside of the block, we put a flat washer first, the split washer, and then the nut on top.
Okay, in order to get your bolts in there, you're gonna have to lift the lower subframe, and don't forget your bracket when you put this bolt in. Let's lift this jack up until someone says nay. A little more. Now, before you tighten up your lower bolt on your multi-link spacers, make sure all of them are in. Do not tighten one before the other.
Now that we have all of the multi-link spacer bag number 2 bolts installed and snugged up, now we need to install the forward support bracket spacer.
Make sure your ABS line is on the inside of the bracket, not looped up through it.
Okay, now we can install the brake line brackets. Make sure the elbow is pointing inwards, as that points the direction where the brake line will be rotated inwards, away from the wheel.
22 mil. Your strut bolt is tightened up. Make sure you torque down your multi-link, your lower multi-link bolts, your forward subframe bolts, your aluminum spacers back here that are make sure you put on your ABS line and tighten it back up, and then you can put your shrouds back on. If you do want to reinstall your plastics under your car, the little guards, they will fit a little wonky because of this spacer, but they will fit.
We're going to be installing a 3/4 inch carrier bearing spacer today. So things you'll need: 3/8 extension, 17 millimeter socket, 14 millimeter socket, 12 millimeter socket. We will provide the hardware and the spacers for this. You also need a 12 millimeter end wrench, or some guys can get in there with a little bit tighter, shorter socket, depending. On some models, you can get away without removing the heat shield. On this one, it looks like we're gonna be able to get away without removing it. So first things first, we do need to make clearance for the carrier bearing to move down, so you can bend the heat shield down a little bit, right at the carrier, just a little bit. Okay, now that there's obviously more than enough clearance for when it gets lowered, pull out the two 14 millimeter bolts. Okay, with the heat shield still in there, it's supporting the carrier bearing for us. Okay, now what I've done is I've changed to a 17 millimeter socket, and what we want to do is thread in the bolt to the carrier bearing and then install the spacer. To make sure they're torqued down to 22 foot-pounds. Next thing, make sure the drive shaft's clear of any obstruction, exhaust is clear, your heat shield is still clear and out of the way, and we are golden.